conference is recorded.
All right, so just to repeat, my name is Jeremy Meiske. I'm a State Procurement Manager with the Office of State Procurement. I've been here for about 6 years, and I've been working on emergency operations support for much of that time.
Good morning. My name is Ben James. I'm a State Procurement Analyst here with the Office of State Procurement. I've been here for just over 3 years and have been working emergency operations support since the beginning of COVID-19. Today, we're going to discuss pieces of emergency procurement. We're going to start with a look at Lepak and Ecat. We're going to move to Emergency Procurement Authority. We're going to go then on to defining emergency procurement, then emergency procurement methods and considerations. There will be time allowed for questions after each section. Please enter them in the Zoom chat box, and our moderator will get everything together, and we'll answer them in between the sections. Okay. We have two main electronic systems that our vendor community utilizes. Lepak is for registering, updating information, and finding current bid opportunities. Ecat is for viewing current contract information. We will go over each of these in more detail. Please sticker. Links throughout the presentation will be collected on the final slide, so you don't have to worry about writing all of this down. We will get to it.
Okay, so just beginning with Lepak, this is kind of the entryway for a lot of the stuff that we do and a lot of our involvement with you guys as vendors. The first thing we really want to talk about is the vendor registration system. It is self-service. You can create a vendor profile and update it with new information, commodity codes, et cetera. We're going to go through some of that as we go through these next few slides. There are help scripts throughout Lepak. If you go on the header, I believe it's got a vendor registration help script that's very useful for getting started. We've got a link for the UNSPSC codes, which is how we track all of the commodities. So if you go look through that and find where, what you're providing, and make sure that that is linked to your profile. One really important piece of this is that we need to have updated information for you, because every now and then we'll go into the system expecting to be able to find a vendor and locate the contact person, only to see that it has not been updated in 10 years in some cases. So my recommendation is that you go through annually and make sure that whoever was the contact person still is, or that you've transferred the account ownership to a new person who is going to be able to actively manage it. This will ensure that we're able to get in touch with somebody on the fly as needed, and it'll make it much more likely that you'll see bid opportunities as they become available. So here you can see this is a screen capture of the vendor menu. The first link, the vendor enrollment portal, that's going to be where you're going to go to set up your initial profile. A best practice is to make sure that multiple people in your organization have access to the system, because I think as we've all seen over the last year, there's been a lot of changes. There's been a lot of fluctuation in staff that are currently employed, people moving on to new roles, and people just otherwise not being available anymore. So one thing would be to make sure that if your admin assistant is the one who normally deals with it, make sure that information is backed up somewhere and that you can get access to it when you need it. The next link is going to be to maintain your information, and this is going to be really important for updating. So that's going to be where you go to log in. If for some reason you are unable to log in, we've got help desk information coming up, and that's going to be who you'll contact to get unlocked. And then as you can see, there are also several other links. The UNSPSC PSC code. There's a product tree as well, so that you can kind of look through and see grouped categories of things and kind of figure out what level you're interested in saying that you're able to provide for. We've also got search options for the vendor registration, and you can look at other vendors. If you click on a vendor after you've searched them, you will be able to see all of the code commodity codes that they've included on their profile, which can be really useful for kind of determining if you've missed anything. If you know another company that provides a similar service or good that you do, go check out their registration and see what else they've got listed on there. The next slide here is for the Lepak main menu. So we were in the vendor menu, and as you can see along the top, that's a whole section on the right there, the vendor registration menu, that's where we were. This part here is going to give you all the ways to search for a bid. So, for example, you can search by category, which will be broad groupings of commodity types. This is a good idea to get an idea of what kind of requests are currently on the table. I would recommend looking at it regularly just to see what's coming through, because stuff happens for us on an annual and every 3-year basis. So you may be looking for something that you don't see immediately. We've also got bids by department. The vast majority of these are going to be under the Office of State Procurement's tab, but there are things that are done by other agencies. So if you work in particular with an agency and you've been dealing with them in the past, that can be a useful tab to keep track of to see if they've posted anything that's not coming through our office. You can also use the Search for Open Bids tab. This will show all current opportunities, and there are a few filtering criteria such as department, category, date ranges, and a keyword search. So that could be an interesting place to just poke around and see what's available currently on, right now. You can also search by bid number, and this is going to be very useful if you see an advertisement for some reason listed in the newspaper. You'll be able to look up that solicitation number. It's going to begin with a 3 in most cases. This will be one note is that I know a lot of people use third-party aggregating websites to locate bids. A caveat with that is that they are pulling information kind of automatically, and so very often the information will be wrong. So it is very important to, whenever you see something on a third-party website or an email list that you receive, come to our website and confirm the information, because they may not have picked up the actual bid opening date. They may not have gotten any updates that have been published. So rather than relying on those things, if you use them as a tool to notice when stuff is coming through, and then come to our website and verify. And as I was saying a minute ago, here's the Lepak Search by Open Bid page. And you can see we've got drop downs for a variety of different search criteria. If you were to search this wide open, it would just show you every bid on Lepak that is currently available.
Okay, so now we're going to go into the Louisiana Electronic Catalog, or Ecat for short. This houses all of our current contract information, so it's going to, everything, as long as it's not expired, will be available through there. There's numerous fields that can be filled out to do a search in Ecat. If you're already a contract holder, you can search by your contract number or your vendor name. When searching, be sure to clear your previous search before trying to enter a new query. It doesn't like conflicting items. It kind of goes off a little bit. But if you know what your contract is for, you could search by the contract description field. For example, hospital beds. I've highlighted the box, for contract description. Where I entered this, I did this search on my own, and brought up the 3 contracts that we had, specifically for the daily rental of hospital beds, our emergency contingency contract. You remember the UNSPSC or commodity codes we discussed just a bit ago? You can even search by those in the product category field. You could find all of the contracts that contain at least one line item with that particular product category number. If the contract description will not always pull everything related to a commodity, try searching in the product category or line item description and the catalog item long description fields. That will give you a more granular level approach to the contracts themselves, because sometimes you might have a contract that has a vague title that covers a lot of ground, but it doesn't necessarily cover individual items very well in the description, so you have to get to that line level to see what's actually there. T numbers are how OSP tracks contracts or groups of similar contracts throughout their contract life cycles. And as those cycles continue, we keep utilizing those same numbers so we can basically trace it back to the beginning. You click lookup to see the available options. If one of those looks applicable to your situation, you can search that T number and locate all of the contracts that fall into that category. A continuation of the previous example for hospital beds, searching for T number 92821 will yield the same 3 contracts that we've been looking at. These fields are useful when you're trying to locate a specific contract. If all else fails, you could simply go down to the emergency toggle switch and switch it to yes. That will pull up all of our emergency contingency contracts, with, excuse me, which cover a large portion of the goods that we know we need during a disaster. If you know that your product or service is comparable to current contract holders, reviewing their contract is a great way to get an understanding of what bidding and winning a contract will ultimately look like. For now, we will take a moment to answer your questions about Lepak and Ecat. If you haven't done so already, please enter any questions into our Zoom chat box, and our moderator will get them to us.
I just asked any questions.
Okay, so no questions so far. Okay, so if we have no questions on Lepak and Ecat, which if you have any coming up, you can still include them, and we'll just capture them in the next section.
We did get one that just came up.
Okay.
How would I know a T number before I search?
So let me go back in the slides a little bit real quick. So if you can see here in this box, there's the T number with the fill field, and then there's a button next to it called Lookup. If you click that Lookup button, it will bring up a list of the T numbers that are available. Not every contract has a T number, so this is not a foolproof method. Another way would be to basically take the other search fields, look for something applicable to what you're trying to find that contract, and look up to see if that has a T number. You can then clear the search field and search for that T number and see if there's anything else related. So, for example, if I'm looking for ice trucks and I find one contract because I know the vendor, one of the vendors who provides it, I can look up that vendor, I can find the contract that they hold, I can look up the T, I can find that T number on their contract, and then I can go search the T number to find all the other ice truck contracts, just as an example.
So we had another question come in. Who do we contact for day-to-day issues with Ecat and Lepak questions?
Okay. If it is a question related to a specific contract, the best practice is going to be to get in touch with the buyer who handles that contract. That is always going to be a good option because they'll be able to get you in touch with the appropriate person. We also have a vendor help desk that will be able to either help you directly or get you in touch with the appropriate person. If you are having an issue with just searching, I would recommend starting there. There is a help button in the top right. I'm not 100% sure what that's going to tell you, and I can't drop out of the screen right now to check, but that would be a thing to check as well to see if that would answer your question, because there are some help scripts that are available. Okay. So with that, I'm going to get back to, now we're going to basically talk about what we consider an emergency and how that kind of changes our operations a little bit. So what is an emergency? We've got situations where the governor has declared a state of emergency. So this is going to be things like, it can take a variety of forms. We've got, man-made and natural disasters, public health crises, et cetera. I mean, it's going to run the gamut at this point. I think that's something that we can all take away from the last 2 years, is that there is a constant flow of situations we did not anticipate. And so our goal is to be prepared for the unexpected. So what is a usual emergency? Because that's going to be different from what we're talking about here. A usual emergency is going to be things like a pipe burst. I think we're going to talk about that in a minute on the next slide, so we'll get more into that. It's also going to differ from a presidentially declared emergency. So when you see, normally the process would go that the governor declares a state of emergency, and then there would be a request to have the president declare a state of emergency so that we could activate, those national resources as well. On the off chance that the governor does not declare a state of emergency and the president did, we may still have an emergency on our hands, but the emergency contingency contracts would not be in play at that time. So again, a usual emergency would be something like a pipe bursting and needing immediate remediation. Agencies are required to follow a procedure for that. So they would be reaching out, to get those things sourced. So if you hear somebody tell you, I have an emergency, that may be true, but it may not rise to the level of needing to have these resources that we have available for statewide emergencies.
So there's many examples, and you can be as small for a governor-declared state of emergency. A catastrophic emergency could be as small as a metro area, it could be regional, it could be statewide. But when the governor declares a state of emergency, statewide emergency operations plan goes into effect. That full plan is at the link attached there. GOSEP and local offices of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness activate and begin staging resources, and our emergency contingency contracts are activated. Please take note that the governor can declare a state of emergency for the entire state of Louisiana or narrow it down to specific parishes or municipalities. Specifically, one example I like is if a local water system fails and it becomes a public health crisis, for, say, Rayville Water Works in Richland Parish lost a pump for potable water distribution, the governor could declare a state of emergency for that specific water district. Louisiana Department of Health, LDH, may issue a boil advisory, and state procurement might get notified to call our potable water tanker and transportation contractor to provide potable water service to local hospitals. It could take a lot of forms.
So on this slide, we've got just a couple of things regarding the authority for emergency procurements. This is a kind of convoluted process, so I'm going to go through it as best we can. Local governments are responsible under all applicable laws for emergency management within their jurisdiction. And you can find that language on the Emergency Operations Plan PDF linked on page 35, and I believe that's 35 of the PDF. So on the document, because they don't have pages on the cover sheet, that's going to be 33. So depending on if you've got it printed out or not, either 33 or 35. So while they are responsible, the state does what it can to offer support and help coordinate things, especially when it's a multi-parish, kind of a wider range. We don't want people competing for resources. We want to make sure that everybody is getting what they need to provide the service and protect the health and safety of their citizens. So while they are responsible for their emergency management, they will be coordinating with the governor and the GOSEP director directly. And like I said, especially when resources are tight, many of those local OSEPs are going to be submitting their requests through GOSEP. So they have a web ticketing system. They will submit stuff up the chain, and that basically allows us to determine, allows GOSEP to determine and then inform us what is needed, where it's needed, how quickly it's needed, et cetera. This link at the bottom here for the local OSEPs is going to have contact information for those entities. We have an extra slide. This is the authority for emergency procurements for the Office of State Procurement. So as you can see, under Revised Statute 39-1598, Chief Procurement Officer or his or her designee above the level of procurement officer may make or authorize others to make emergency procurements when there exists an imminent threat to public health, welfare, safety, or public property under emergency conditions as defined in accordance with regulations. So just based on that, it's a pretty wide-ranging definition, but generally speaking, this is going to come into play whenever we've got those gubernatorial proclamations. So here on this next part, you can see we've got the governor's proclamations and or executive orders. This is useful for relaxing administrative logistics and formalities. So, for example, during COVID, before that we were doing bid openings in person. As that ramped up, we got, emergency declarations pertaining to COVID that allowed us to do online, similar to this training. So we just kind of have to roll with the punches, and these proclamations allow us to do that. Existing statutory authorization makes procurement less reliant than some other processes of government. And if you go to this link below, you will find a list, basically, of all the proclamations in date order. So if you go to that link and just do a Control F and search emergency, over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've had a lot of them, so you will find quite a few examples. So I guess we'll take a moment now to answer questions regarding emergency procurement authority.
So far, we just have one question.
Okay.
What would an email look like from a buyer looking for disaster assistance, or how would I avoid a scam email?
So I guess the first thing to check would be that it's coming from the domain la.gov, or some agencies have their agency initials before that, so it'll be dhh.la.gov, for example, state or sos.la.gov. Those are some examples. That would be step one. Step two is that if you have an internet connection at that time, you can, for our office, I don't know about other offices, but for our offices, you can go onto our website, and we have a roster of employees and what commodities they handle. So that would be one other way to verify that person actually works there. You can always call our main number and verify. Now, during an emergency, there may not be anybody at the front desk, so that is not a foolproof way. And then there is also an email that we use for emergencies now, and it is osp-eoc@la.gov, and you can reach out to that email to verify that that person is actually working for us. If you do find any instances where you're getting a scam email, please notify us, because we would like to notify the appropriate folks to get that taken care of, because that's awful.
I will add on to this and say that in the event of a true emergency, a lot of times we're making phone calls more than we're emailing. Unless we're doing a blanket email to cover a lot of ground really quickly, we're actually reaching out to vendors directly. Again, the importance of keeping your contact information updated in Lepak is we might query vendors for a specific service or in a specific geographic area, and we'll reach out directly and start calling. If we don't have something on contract, set in stone for a given region, it's up to us to do the digging and go get it. So we'll reach out directly by phone, and we'll identify ourselves whenever we're calling what our emergency is. You know exactly who you're talking to. So I hope that helps clear it up a little bit. And we will follow up any verbal communication with an email from our @la.gov email address.
In addition, I'd also like to add, if somebody calls you and says, please send this product now, I'll get you something later, no. You will receive a purchase order, and it will be on our standard, purchase order template. Now, assuming some catastrophic failure, I don't know what that would look like, but you would have something from somebody who has the authority to request that from you, to fall back on and say, this is what I'm asking for. So on those purchase orders, there is an invoicing contact, there is a ship-to contact, and there is a buyer contact. So if you receive a purchase order, you should be able to confirm with any of those people that it is real.
Right. And it doesn't happen often, but there are some emergency scenarios where it's almost impossible to know what that final contract amount or PO amount would be. You would need to be working directly with that given agency's director of procurement, director of purchasing, whatever their title may be. One specific instance that we're on right now is with Department of Agriculture is one of their projects. It's impossible to know how much they're going to need for the given requirements. And so they've just got their director of procurement is working on something directly with a vendor, and there will be a purchase order. There just isn't one hammered out as of yet. Again, we don't like doing it that way, but sometimes we don't have a choice. So make sure that you're working with a decision maker that you can verify. Like, you could go to Wildlife and Fisheries or Department of Agriculture's website and pull a directory and see who their director of procurement is.
Okay. Do we have any more?
We do, I'm just not sure, we might need some more information. It just says, I have an executive order from the governor. I received it from Black Chamber for my company, Webster Telecommunications. What do I do?
For case-by-case things, like if it's a specific thing, I would say, shoot us an email and we can look into it for you. You think we should use the reports box? Or?
I did put the vendor inquiry email a few times in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, I would say reach out to that vendor inquiry email, and then tell them that it was, it's based on this training, and to get in touch with Jeremy or Ben, and they'll forward that to us, and we'll make sure that we can get you some information as quickly as possible.
You don't have any other questions at this time?
Okay.
All right, we're gonna move into emergency procurements. How are emergency procurements different from standard procurements? One, we move at a faster pace. We need to respond immediately. We need vendors to respond immediately, not 21 plus days later, like a typical 21-day sealed bid. The stakes are much higher. As Jeremy mentioned earlier, life, health, and/or property is at immediate risk. We've got to get moving on these things. We do usually have fragmented information. The full picture is not always clear. We're not entirely sure where the product may ultimately end up. It's not always 100%. So we work as closely as we can with our vendor points of contact and our delivery point of contact to make sure that we can dot as many I's and cross as many T's as possible before we can actually confirm what's needed, when it's needed, and how much of it. So fewer suppliers, many businesses are closed or inaccessible, and that could be a power outage, that could be telecoms are down, could be any number of things. So we have to have a reliable supplier network that can supply in emergencies. Logistics can be a nightmare. Road closures, weather impacts, loss of power. I'll touch on an example here. for logistics during the ice storm in February. One of our transport vendors, we needed some inventory moved in the Shreveport area. Well, it had an inch of ice on it. They didn't want to send their trucks into basically an ice storm, and they said no, we can't do it. And it was very difficult trying to get that done. Our funding source, federal funds mostly, are utilized instead of state funds. Again, that goes back into FEMA funding and that sort of thing. And our funding rules. Federal rules take precedence over state rules. Despite these challenges, procurement, why is this staggered out? Okay. Despite these challenges, procurement is still a must. We've got to equip GOSEP, LDH, DCFS, et cetera, with vital goods and services. Bring together supplier community with the end users in need. Ensure compliance with state and federal regulations. Maximize the chance for reimbursements without disallowances. We'll get into more of that in a second. And the need for flexibility. We're relying on partial information for urgent, high-stakes actions. FEMA rules require compliance with the more stringent of federal or state procurement regulations, typically state in effect at the time. A partial relaxation of state regulations brings us into alignment with both the federal guidelines, and a reduced chance for disallowances caused by unrealistic standards. Flexibility must be applied to immediate needs only, not regular. So let's touch on this a little bit. Disallowances. GOSEP is kind of bound by FEMA to keep their costs down. They're only allowed to pay X amount for a given commodity. So we have to be as compliant as that. We're not trying to create excess budget items based off of an emergency that we had no control of. So we need to keep everything in check there. We want to make sure that our contracts, we set contracts for consistent pricing. We've got to make sure that we're paying that pricing. So whenever we call and check availability, if we get a quote that's outside of our contract price, that throws up a lot of red flags. Just because it's an emergency does not relax an emergency contingency contract. And the flexibility. So a normal contract for our best price might have a delayed lead time of, say, 30 to 60 days before we get our product. In an emergency, we need that immediately. We can't, if the vendor can hold the pricing, make the delivery on an immediate timeline, great. If not, then we have to find something that can satisfy right away. For emergency procurements, we'll take some questions now, if you have them.
Okay, we will move on to methods of emergency procurement then. So our first method and our primary, our preferred method is to have a pre-established emergency contingency contract. We currently have over 100 of these, and they're available to activate, as soon as the governor declares an emergency. This includes special goods and services like MREs, bulk ice, refrigeration trucks, etc. Like we said earlier, if you go onto Ecat and drop down that toggle to emergency yes, and then say find it, they will all come up. These are bid in advance of hurricane season, long before they are needed. So usually we try to have the ball rolling and a lot of this done by April. So if you go on those and look at the emergency contracts, you'll see the effective dates. Almost all of our contracts are bid for a 1-year term with an option to renew for 2 additional years. So you can kind of ballpark when that commodity will be coming up for bid again. I would recommend doing so and kind of putting it on your calendar and keeping an eye on it. Because we do this, like I said, in advance, because this is the thing we want to lock in. These are ready and available with pre-negotiated pricing and priority access. The contracts are updated after each emergency based on whatever we've learned. So if we find that, this particular way of doing it wasn't working, the next time we go back to bid, we're gonna try to incorporate that lesson and make sure that we're addressing those concerns and needs. One important note on emergency contracts is that the pricing is required to be consistent. If you bid on something in, March and say you can do it for $100, and then an emergency comes around and you say you can't do it for less than $250, we have non-exclusivity clauses in those contracts, and we won't be able to go with you, and that is going to be a mark against that contract. So as you're looking at these, as you're preparing to bid on them, please make sure that you are taking into account, the possible cost overruns that are going to be happening during an actual event. One thing I do recommend is look at the current pricing and see how they've structured it, who the current contract holders. And if you have, if you look at that and you say, I have no clue how that works, I have no clue how they can do it for that price, that might be some more research that's needed then in order for you to be able to bid on that. So when an emergency contingency contract is not available, we will then look at our current regular contracts. Now, these will not always fulfill our needs. We're going to try to go with people that we've already got on contract because we already have a relationship there. We've got contact information that's solid. We've got, pricing that, makes sense. But if your pricing is, different than the contract, then we may not be able to go with that particular, method. If your timeline is a lot of our regular contracts have flexible timelines. You can say, okay, well, I can get that to you in 2 weeks. Like Ben was saying, we don't have 2 weeks in an emergency. So if we tell you we need it by tomorrow and you say I can't get it to you until next week, then we're going to have to go, elsewhere. Now we may circle back and say this is the best we can find, and it's really nothing personal. It's really, we're just trying to keep the health and safety of all the citizens of the state in the forefront of our minds and get them the things that they need as quickly as possible to make sure that nothing else goes wrong, because these can have cascading effects. We have an example, basically, like of contract A is a non-emergency contract that is currently active. During the bid process, the contractor noted that they could deliver within 30 days of the receipt of order, which for a normal contract is great. That doesn't work for the emergency procurement, and we literally need it as soon as humanly possible. So during the first state of emergency, after that contract was established, we may contact that vendor and inquire about accommodating an emergency timeline. If they can meet the timeline, then, great. We've got, potential for, maybe we'll expand this into an emergency contract as well later. We do have some instances where we've got the same product on an emergency contract and a regular contract, and the prices are different, and the reason is that timeline. If the pricing goes up significantly because of the timeline, because you have to pay extra shipping, that may be not something that may not be something that we can do. We also have what we call resource lists, and this is going to be contact information and vendor names of people who have reached out before and maybe bid on something and did not receive a bid. Did not receive a contract. Maybe they were more expensive. But if all else fails, we're going to go to those people and we're going to, this is the information that we have. So we're going to immediately jump in and, ask them, can you meet this? Can you meet these delivery timelines? And if yes, then that's something that we can proceed with. If no, then we, may have to go to these other options. An additional way to get on the resource list is to look for the contract that is applicable to your service or goods and reach out to that buyer and tell them, I realize that this is not available for bid yet. It looks like it's going to be another 2 years. I would like to have my contact information included on the resource list for emergencies. I would say that's a great option because, again, at the beginning of every calendar year when we're doing these, that's a big part of it, is making sure the resource lists are up to date. I remember sitting down and having to call dozens of vendors to verify the contact information on those resource lists from previous years, getting updates, adding people, removing people who were no longer interested. So if you do that legwork and reach out to the buyer, they will be very, very grateful, and they will put you on that list, and it might be an opportunity. Barring anything else, we do a request for quotations. So this is basically the same as our invitation to bid. but it is a much quicker timeline. We introduced this with COVID, because as you all may remember, getting PPE was an absolute nightmare for everyone. So we were calling people constantly, and this was our solution to that. Basically what we would do is we got everybody who was interested in providing PPE, who had access, who had those relationships with manufacturers, we got them registered in Lepak, and we published this as basically a quick bid. This balances the terms and the requirements of a regular invitation to bid with the 3 quotes, situation that we're going to talk about in a minute. And it basically gives as many people as possible an opportunity to respond, but still keeps us true to the timeline that we have to meet. This leverages our existing registrations and allows the public to see what we are doing, to see what we are requesting. And we are continually adding known and introduced providers to resource lists, trying to get y'all set up with Lepak so that you can see anything that comes out in this, through this method. And then event durations are tailored to meet the urgency and complexity of the project. So for some stuff that we've never done before, we might have a longer timeline. We might be, we might need to take the extra time to make sure we're doing it right, because it would be even worse getting half of a product rather than getting the whole need met and taking an extra day. So that's just a judgment call that's made on a case-by-case basis. We also have the 3 quotes method, which is, with this last storm with Ida, we were doing this a lot with generators and pumps, because no one had any. They were, we were out. So at that point, we're calling around. We're asking, this is the minimum level of competition. It's built for speed. There is less transparency because it's not going on to Lepak, and that is why the resource lists are so important. So if you're interested in getting on those, I would really recommend it, because we pull from those a lot for these quotes. We individually contact 3 vendors minimum. In a lot of cases, we'll contact more. They're not posted globally, and we ask them for their pricing. We ask them for their timeline, and it does narrow the visibility, and it does eliminate potential eligible providers. But in a pinch, this is something that is necessary. There's an HCR 31 that was introduced by Representative Lyons, which asks agencies to use the RFQ process instead, and so when possible, we do that. There's also another method called SFO that we didn't really touch on in these slides. And an SFO is basically for much more complex processes, and it would be more akin to an RFP that would be published similar to an RFQ. So it's going to follow very much the same procedures, but it's going to be a lot more complicated. And in those instances, they will be asking basically, we want this end result. You tell us how you'll get there, what it'll cost, and what your qualifications are. That is a much less common method, especially as we get deeper into having repeated emergencies. We can often streamline things and get back down to an RFQ process, or even set it up as an emergency contract. But our goal is to always be moving these up from the less transparent and quicker things to the more established things, ultimately resulting in an emergency contract. That is our, preferred method.
All right, so now we're going to get into considerations. We have a prohibition on geographic preferences. The greater role of federal funding reinforces need for compliance with federal procurement regulations on subgrantees. 2 CFR 200.319, the non-federal entity must conduct procurements in a manner that prohibits the use of a statutorily or administratively imposed state, local, or tribal geographical preference in the evaluation of bids or proposals. Non-compliant procurements are ineligible for federal funding. Reciprocal geographic preferences in revised statute 1604.5, section C, gets into that. That would interfere with these geographic preferences, with the prohibition on geographic preferences, And intentionally reducing competition by excluding non-local companies will increase our costs, not only because there are fewer bidders, but also because those remaining bidders know there's less incentive to sharpen their pencils and get us better pricing. Key point here is that the geographic preference is non-compliant, and we need all the federal eligibility we can get to help cover the costs of recovering from these emergencies and these disasters. So please note that we're not locking this into Louisiana only or anything like that. Basically, once we get outside of our normal methods, it's kind of whoever gets there first with the ball wins, is how it typically goes.
And, can I chime in real quick?
Yeah.
One of our primary, geographic preferences in our normal operations is the Hudson Veteran Initiative, which, if you're not familiar with it, I would recommend you go look at that on the Louisiana Economic Development website. I don't have a link for that because it's just coming to mind right now, but it is a very great program that is good for small vendors who are looking to do business with the state. But I know that in the past, we've had questions from Hudson Veteran Initiative vendors about why they're not being sought out for emergency opportunities, and this is part of that reason. So it's just something to keep in mind. So we also have some considerations on agency roles and responsibilities. Various agencies handle different parts of the emergency support functions. This is defined in that emergency operations plan, so you can read in depth about it. But for example, DOTD handles transportation and evacuation. They have established contracts for that already. DOTD and CPRA, or CIPRA, handle debris clearing on roads, depending on who owns those roads. Also, to add on to this, you're gonna have some local entities handling road clearance. We at OSP do not handle debris removal. I have never seen that come across my desk. During this last, during the winter storm, I was asking around, trying to see if anybody else had, and so far I have not found it at all to come through OSP. So I have provided some information on the final slide, that'll give you some contact info for those locals. I would also recommend reading the EOP plan and referencing where these, emergency support, functions rest, and, being in contact with those people to find out how they want you to respond, because they're gonna have their own processes that are not related to these at all. FEMA and the Red Cross handle sheltering and food. We have established contracts for those. So, you can go on our, Ecat and take a look at them and see, if that's something that you provide, how you might get involved in that. And for medical and health needs, LDH takes the lead on those. They also have, their own EOC location and their own EOC staff. And so they will have their own processes for those items. And so we can now take a moment to answer any other questions.
So the first question is, usually what's the total time the contracts are open for applying?
I believe they're on this, open for 21 days at least.
Yeah,
Is that accurate?
it falls under a 21-day sealed bid.
Yeah, that would be the normal method that we use for almost everything for contract related. So I would anticipate that. So like I said earlier, the best way for you to go about determining, what you're gonna be able to bid on and, getting in the door with that is gonna be to go onto Ecat, find the applicable contract, look at the current dates, and recognize that, if it's got a 1 year period, there may be 2 additional, renewals available. You can find that in the terms and conditions, as an attachment on that contract, so, pull it all down and, read through it and, back the dates out and say, okay, well, if it was opened or, if the contract started on April 1st, 2021, and it's got a potential of 3 years, then I know I need to, first of all, get on the resource list. So I'm gonna contact that buyer and get on the resource list so that I can, get notified. I'm gonna be registered in Lepak so that with that commodity number, so that when the bid comes out, I'll get an email notification. And then mark it on your calendar, check annually to make sure that we're not rebidding it, because There may come a time that something major changes, and we don't exercise that renewal option. So, mark that end date and mark it out for the remaining years that are potentially on that contract, and check Lepak. And then once that bid is posted, you should have at least 21 days to respond. And that's assuming no addenda, nothing else gets published that pushes that date out, but a minimum of 21 days.
I want to add a little something here. Whenever you're setting your calendar reminders, so if you look in Ecat, it will give you the beginning date. So I know I have some coming up in 22 that started in 2019 and will be expiring on April 30th. So my intention is that we're going to start hammering out a rebid for these contracts the first part of January. Like we generally allow a 4-month window to start working on rebids or renewals and getting that done. So if you have it set for April 30th of 22 to be looking for a rebid, you might want to start setting a monthly reminder about 4 months ahead of that to go back in and look. That way you run less risk of missing any bid opportunities that would be coming about.
Yeah. Good point.
Okay, next question. When it comes to emergency procurement, are quicker shipment charges allowed above normal pricing?
If we are asking you for a quote, then we are asking you for your price.
Yeah.
If it is a contract, and it was a pre-negotiated contract with shipping, no. But when we, if we're at the point where we don't have vendors who have the product, and we are reaching out to vendors in North Louisiana, in Texas, in Mississippi, and I say, I need a pump. I need a 12-inch, pump that's going to move this amount of water with all the attachments and all the necessary power supply and everything like that. And you tell me it's going to be, X dollars. That needs to be inclusive. So you can break it out however you want, but you need to tell us everything that it's going to cost you to get that to our site, how your pricing is structured. Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it prorated? Just give us all that information when we're asking you for the quote, and we can, we'll use that to kind of compare apples to apples with what other people are providing us, because everybody does it a little different. So we'll kind of have to say, okay, well, our anticipation is to have this for 2 weeks. So with mobilization, demobilization, a hotshot driver, et cetera, like how much is that going to actually cost me for this vendor versus this vendor? Right. And we're going to go with the one who's going to be able to get it to us in time and on price. What we do not want is for you to undercut yourself, tell us you can do it for $10, and then after we cut you a purchase order, say, haha, just kidding, it's going to be $100. In those instances, we will probably cancel the purchase order.
Okay, next question. Is there an order that you are required to follow when beginning to make calls for emergency procurement of a particular good or service?
I think the way we lined it out here is the procedure we do with emergency and then regular and then resource lists and then, if applicable, doing a quote thing, but then doing, vendor calls.
The only thing that would preclude any of that is if we had a mandatory contract for a specific commodity. That's the only thing that would circumvent our current process. Mm-hmm. But as far as I know, we don't have any mandatory use contracts.
Correct. That's my understanding as well. So, and almost all of our contracts, I believe, have a non-exclusivity clause, meaning that we can have multiple contracts for the same item, and that, we don't necessarily have to go with that particular thing if it doesn't meet the need in that moment. Right.
Okay, next, who do we need to contact to be added to the resource list?
The best way is going to be to go onto Ecat, find that contract that you're interested in, look at the buyer, and their email will be on the contract page of Ecat. So reach out to them by phone or by email and let them know, I realize that this is not up for bid currently. I want to be on the resource list. I want to be notified of any future bid opportunities related to this file. And if you are already in Lepak, give them your vendor number. That kind of helps, I would say.
And if you for some odd reason can't find what you're looking for in Ecat, whatever contract that you would be compatible with, send your information to the vendor help desk, and then they will forward it to the appropriate buyer. I get it. You're not familiar with this system. It happens all the time. There's a lot of times I get crossed up in it. So if it comes up where you can't pull what you're looking for, just shoot an email over to the vendor help desk, and they will pass it along, and it will get to the right person.
Okay, next, where can a list of, well, let me reword this. Where can a resource list be found?
Those are internal.
Yeah, they're internal. They're kept with the file. So it's really like our, like kind of our bid list. So whenever, basically that I used to build my resource lists by going through previous years and looking at who had bid. But yeah, that's not an official thing that's published.
Right.
Okay, what's the minimum time handled in RFQ and Itbs?
Minimum, I do not know, because I think that's gonna be a real case-by-case situation. When we were doing COVID, PPE, it was about a week.
I think sometimes it's even less than that.
Yeah,
I think some of those it was 2 days.
Yeah, in some instances, it was a real quick turnaround. So, if you see that an emergency is declared, if you're set up in Lepak, I would be watching my email. And if you're not set up in Lepak, I would be watching Lepak.
Right, and we also, I was gonna say, we just did in response to Ida, we just did a non-congregate shelter bid for, I say bid, it was an RFQ, and I think they released it Friday, and it closed yesterday. So, I mean, they're turning them around pretty quick.
Okay, next, are there any current emergency procurement opportunities in the janitorial and cleaning categories that we can respond to?
Those are done. I know I did one for, some shelters in Morgan City, or in the Morgan City area. I know there was a task for something in the Grand Isle area yesterday, but I think it's already been, I think they were requesting quotes from vendors, so it really just depends. If you wanna be on that resource list, we need to know ASAP.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think that is historically, that has not been a need. I think with COVID, that has become a much more pressing thing, but this is like I think our second disaster after, which shelters might have been open, so we're really just starting to see that now, but that may be something that we'll explore, but currently, we do not have an emergency contract for cleaning.
Well, and last year during all the hurricanes, when we were shuffling people around, we basically had wraparound services for the hotels that we didn't need these types of things. So now we're getting we're in this scenario where we're opening the shelters up, and we need them cleaned, basically daily. But like I said, I haven't seen another task, and I was just on EOC yesterday, so.
And to reference those wraparound services, whenever they were housing COVID patients in hotels, it was basically you're gonna bring, they had to have the full PPE, they had to, there was a lot of requirements. Mm-hmm. That one was done as what ultimately became an SFO, I believe, because that was a more complicated thing that we had not done before.
Right.
So we knew some basic requirements, but we were relying on vendors who knew what they do to tell us, this is what it'll take to meet your needs, and this is what it'll cost. As we get deeper into it, as we have this situation arise more often, like I said earlier, the goal is always to move these into a more standardized process, so that is probably something that will be on the radar coming up.
And I think one thing to note from the start of COVID is that I think we've had to rewrite our entire playbook. We've had to go back to the drawing board, and because even the most basic processes that we've had that have been turned on their head. From everything what we did supporting the election last year, for everything that we did, revolving around shelters, how we're approaching that, everything's been turned upside down. So we've been 18 months into this, and we're still finding things that we can make better.
Okay, the last question that we have, if there's no bid out there and you believe that you have a product that can be better for employees in the state, what do you do? Is there a process to ask for a 5-minute conversation with the decision makers to present that product or service?
I get this question a lot. If there is a similar product that is on state contract, I would recommend reaching out to that buyer. If there's not one, definitely email our vendor help desk and have them get you in touch with the person that manages that commodity. That's the easiest way. And I mean, ultimately, there's a process to follow there, and that process is not a quick 5-minute process. It's going to take due diligence, research, evidence to back it up, that kind of thing. So don't get discouraged by that answer, but we don't give a contract out on the spot. It doesn't happen. So, yeah, please contact our vendor help desk, and we will, they will take care of, make sure that it gets in the right hands, and make sure that once it gets in the hands of an analyst, that it will be reviewed as best they can.
And also to add, if it's a specific thing that is going to be useful to a specific agency or, a group in the state that's doing a specific type of work, you can touch base with them. Now, they can't just buy it from you, but they know the process for asking us to establish a new contract.
Right.
So, our job is to do our due diligence to make sure that we are providing for transparency, competition, and, all of those things that go into leveling the playing field so that all of you have a fair shot at, whatever. So if you say, I have this branded product that would solve this problem that you have, that's great for the agency to know. They can then submit that to us and let us know, we're interested in something like this. We can then review it and determine, okay, is there a way for us to broaden this? Are there other products on the market that are similar? And then that way we can have a good actual competition between whatever product you offered and, anything else that might be similar. So that is kind of what we're doing when we're establishing a new contract, is making sure that all those checks and balances are in place, so that we're not just, going with the first person in the door for a long-term thing that may not be the best, and it may be the best, but it may be more expensive. So, we're trying to balance all of those factors. So that would be my other recommendation, is to kind of look targetedly. Like, I had one reach out to me one time about a coating for elevators, and the idea was, you would have to clean your elevators less often if you had this coating that was fingerprint resistant. I mean, that's cool, but at the same time, I don't know what the need is until the agencies tell me what the need is. So I need those agencies who have elevators to reach out to us and tell us we need something like this, and then we can look into it.
Right. I mean, and ultimately, if you want the best result, you could always give us everything you've got for free. That's a great way for us to get.
He doesn't mean it.
I don't mean that at all. But please keep in mind that price is a major consideration for everything that we do.
That's all we have at this time.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate y'all's time and attention and being interested in this. We really look forward to, if we do business with you currently, we're happy that we do, and we're, glad that you're there for us. And if you're looking to get involved, sorry, what? Sorry. Yes. No, I'm sorry. I actually need to put this screen up. So anyway, point being, yeah, we're really happy that you're with us and that you're interested and that you're, potentially looking into becoming a vendor with us. On this screen, I provided some links that were used throughout the presentation. So if you want to take a screen cap of it, or if this is going to get sent out anyway. But but this is a collection of everything. And this very last one was not in the presentation anywhere, but this is what I was referencing earlier when I said the thing about road clearing, and how Office of State Procurement doesn't handle it. But these groups, this is an Excel document that has a listing of parish and, like, at least, I think the largest or the city, the seat of that parish, contact information, if we could find it available, just to kind of ease that up on y'all, because I know I get calls like that all the time, like, who do I get into contact for this? Unfortunately, it's a constantly revolving door, just because there are so many entities, and even with 2% turnover, that's a lot of people changing in and out. So this information may not be 100% accurate by the time you use it, but at least it's a starting place, I hope, if you're looking for something specific at that local level. And as you can see, we've got all the other ones that we included throughout the presentation. So here is the vendor, the main number, which is also the vendor help desk number. The admin assistant who is answering that phone will be able to get you in touch with whoever is needed. And the vendor help desk, please note that is VENDR, DR with no O in between it for some reason. You get some bounce backs on that, so please note. So again, thank you all so much.